Hello, I'm David from Automate This, and in this short video we're going to take a look at two of the core n8n nodes, the if node and the switch node. Both of these nodes will allow you to split or branch your workflow in different directions. The if node will allow you to split or branch your workflow dependent upon whether a condition that you set is true or false. The switch node, on the other hand, will allow you to branch your workflow in multiple different directions depending on the conditions that you set within the node. Which of these two nodes you will use will largely depend on your own use case. Let's take a look at both of the nodes and some examples of when you might use them. Let's take a look at the if node first. So in my workflow here, I have a webhook trigger node, and I've sent some fake order data to this. And I want to branch my workflow dependent upon whether the customer has selected to sign up for our newsletter or not. And if they have, I would like this to branch off and add them to our mailing list in MailChimp. If not, I just want the workflow to stop. And the condition of whether they have signed up for the newsletter or not is inside of the body JSON. And it's this order add newsletter, and it will show either as yes or no. In this case, it's yes. So to check this condition, I will add in my if node to my workflow. And inside of the parameters here, the idea is that we use the condition to match whether one value matches another. And in the middle here is the condition that you set. You can do this based on a string, which is a string of text, a number, a date or a time, boolean, which is true or false, or empty or not empty, an array or an object. Now in my case, this is going to be a string because the text is either yes or no. So to make this work then, I need to drag in my order add newsletter into value 1 as an expression. You see here the result is showing as yes, but the expression will mean that it checks this in the incoming JSON. If it's not in the JSON at all, it will always be classified as false. If it is there and it's checkable, it will then check whether the condition matches or not. So in my case, I want to check whether this condition matches yes. Now I can make this just a little bit more complicated by adding further conditions underneath. If I click this, I then get the option of and, or. The and option would mean that condition 1 and condition 2 would need to match in order for this to be true. If I selected or, either this condition or this condition would need to match in order for it to be true. To keep this nice and simple, I just have one condition that I want to check, which is this newsletter is equal to yes. And if I run my test step, you will now see that this goes down the true branch. If I was to change this condition to no and test it, you will then see it goes down the false branch. I want this to be true, so I'm going to pop that back to yes and retest it and click back out onto my canvas, and I can now see that the true branch has one item that is moving down it. Now from there I can begin to add additional nodes. So in my case, I want to sign this person up for my newsletter, so I'm going to create a member. And I would essentially then just configure my MailChimp node in order to add this person's details into my newsletter. If you didn't want anything to happen, if this was false, you can just leave this completely blank and the workflow will stop at that point. Another thing that you can do with the if node is to check whether one expression is the same as another expression in different parts of your workflow. So to provide an example of how this works, I'm going to get rid of this MailChimp node for now. And I've got here a HTTP request node. And this is set up to get the order, essentially, that has just been created. So I'm going to open this up and test it. And you can see the order detail here is exactly the same as what was received before. This is just an indication of how this would work. And once I have that, I can now attach an additional if node. And what I can do is to go back to my webhook data and set, let's say, the order email as value 1. And I want to check whether this is the same as the order email in another piece of JSON from another node. So rather than typing the value in here as I did before, I can drag the expression into this box, and what this will then do is to check this expression against this expression. Now I know that these two things are the same, so I'm going to run the test, and this will then go down the true branch. If that was different, it would go down the false branch. We've used this to check whether or not an email matches an email address for security reasons, for example. How you use it is entirely up to you, but that's just another way which you can use the if node, which is to check one expression against another expression rather than a fixed value. What you can also do with the if node is to create a loop. And this is quite a useful thing to do if you think that some data that comes into the workflow will change at some point. So let's take an example of the person or customer here creating an order, which they have done here. And in the original webhook, we have this order payment complete, yes or no. And I want to make sure that this doesn't progress until the order payment complete changes to yes in this case. So what I'm going to do then is to leave my email check here just to demonstrate how this works. I'm going to leave my get request in place because I'm going to use this to check whether or not the payment has been received or not. However, in this if node, I'm going to get rid of this actually and add a new one in. So I want to check whether or not the order payment received here is equal to yes. And if I test this now, it goes down the false branch because that is currently set to no. But I want my workflow to keep checking this to make sure that the payment has indeed been received. So what I'm going to do is to loop this back to the get request. So it'll just keep circling or looping round until that changes. But I don't want it to continuously doing it. So I'm going to add in here something called a wait node. If you haven't seen this one before, it essentially just places a delay into the workflow. We're going to change this to 3 seconds. And I'm going to attach this back to my get request. Now, if I test this now, and I'm going to resend the data back to it, you will see now that it starts looping. And I'm going to update the order in the background to make that payment received as yes. And what you now see is that it begins to go down the true route because the condition inside of the get request has now changed to yes. If, and this is an extreme example, but if you wanted to only loop that, say, 5 times and then give up, you would need to add in an additional function that creates almost like a counter or an increment. Now you can do that by adding in something in a code node. And I'm going to pop this in here after the wait. So I'm going to add in a code node. And I have written myself a real simple function. You can grab this, by the way, from the article on the website. So this now comes out of the original if node to check whether the payment has been received or not. It goes through the wait node, through the code node, which adds the increment. And I'm going to need to add in yet another if node here. So it's going to run the test up to that point. That will then check whether the loop count that I created, let's say, is greater than, so this is going to be a number, is greater than 5. Now, let's get rid of this loop here. So, if it's not greater than 5, I needed to loop back to my get request and run that all the way back through again. If it does become greater than 5, then I want this to stop essentially. So let's take a look at how that works now. And if we run the test, it will loop itself back through 3. That's 5, and now it should go down the true route because that is now greater than 5. Or of course, if the payment changed in the meantime, it would flip to true and it wouldn't go back through the loop. So this is just some really good examples of how you can use the if node. The switch node, on the other hand, doesn't use a true or false, rather it uses whether a condition matches, and you can create as many of these branches as you like. So I've got some data here in a webhook trigger. Let's say that this is a customer service request where a person puts a first name, last name, email address, and department. And let's say that this department could be customer service, it could be sales, or it could be technical. And I want my workflow to branch based on what department the customer is contacting, and then send a message to my Slack channel based on that department. So let's take that and add in my switch node. And similar to before, we're just going to drag in the value and we can create as many of these routing rules here as we like. So firstly, my value is going to be department. So I'm going to drag in my department as an expression. Again, you've got strings, numbers, dates, time, boolean, array, and object. Mine again is going to be a string. And I want this to match my first routing rule as customer service. To make this easier to see in the canvas, I'm going to rename the output as customer service. I can then continue to do this where I next say, for example, department is equal to sales. And department is equal to technical. This would be case sensitive, so you just need to check that is right. Now, what I also suggest that you do here is you add the option here of something called a fallback output. This means If none of them matches, then it does something. So it defaults to none, meaning that the workflow would stop. But you could also add an extra output. Output it to customer service, output it to sales, or output it to technical. Meaning you can attach it to one of the 3 existing routes, or you can create a whole new one. So I'm going to add an extra output here. If I now run this as a test step, you will see this goes down the customer service route, because that matches this to this. If any of the others matched, it would then go down either sales, tech, and if it matched none of them, it would go down the fallback route. And if I click back out to my canvas, I can now see that I've got 4 individual branches: customer service, sales, tech, and fallback. And as a result of that, I can then add additional nodes on the back of each of these. So I'm going to send the message. So Slack channel again, I would configure this to send to the right Slack channel. I'm just going to duplicate this 2 or 3 times now. Do the same for sales. Do the same for tech. And then maybe I can send my fallback one to a general channel or something. So I would essentially then need to make sure that I configure each of these things to send messages to the right channel based on the output of the switch node. So that's the difference between the if node and the switch node, and a couple of examples of how you could use each of those different nodes. I hope you enjoyed this short video. If you did, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel for more great videos on using n8n workflows in the future. Thanks for now.